Welcome to History Class with Dr. W and our study of Vietnam. As we begin, let me briefly discuss what you can expect to see covered in this class and some of the major themes of the course. First, while the American War in Vietnam is a major component of the course, and in fact, we'll spend more time on that than any other single topic, it's not the only thing covered in the course. It's impossible to understand the American experience in Vietnam without at least some understanding of Vietnam's history before American involvement. So we'll start there. In the first part of the course, we will examine early and ancient Vietnamese history, from the earliest stirrings of civilization through the arrival of the French in the 16th and 17th centuries. The second unit will cover the era of French influence from the earliest arrivals of French missionaries through the end of the French Indo-Chinese War, with the Battle of Dien Bien Phu and the Geneva Accords of 1954. At that point, our focus will shift to the Vietnamese experience with American incursions. This begins in the 1950s, during the Eisenhower administration, as North Vietnam, under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, struggled to achieve independence. By the early 1960s and the Kennedy administration, the conflict between North and South Vietnam began to escalate. And during the Lyndon Johnson administration and the mid-1960s, Ho Chi Minh recognized that the only way to achieve an independent and united Vietnam was outright war. We will discuss the deepening quagmire that the war became, the anti-war movement on the American home front, and finally the ugly end of the conflict during the Nixon presidency. In the final unit of the course, we will discuss the outcomes and aftermath of the war in both the United States and Vietnam. The memory and legacy of the war is profound, leaving scars on both nations. We will discuss how both the United States and Vietnam have moved on in the decades since the war, and how culture in both nations reflects the lasting impact of the war. Among the major themes of the course are Vietnamese nationalism and the quest for independence, American Cold War diplomacy and the inevitability of American intervention in Vietnam, the combat experience from both perspectives, missed opportunities for American withdrawal from Vietnam, and collective memory and Vietnam, meanings of the war today. Let's begin with some thoughts and comments about the general geography and topography of the region we know today as Vietnam. In some ways, to even use one word, Vietnam, or think about this region as one nation, is a fallacy. The region, for much of its history, has been divided amongst a great variety of people and nations. At one point, people referred to the 100 Vietnams. So we'll talk about that diversity as well. But first, if we look at a broad map of the region, let's notice a few things. First, the noticeable presence of China to the north. In this first lecture especially, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the influence of China, which is a huge part of Vietnam's history. For much of that history, in fact, Vietnam was a part of China. Notice also Vietnam's position on the coast. Its location through history has placed it at an important crossroads. Obviously, it faces the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean to the east, but it also provides a gateway to the Gulf of Thailand and the Indian Ocean. Traders coming from the Middle East or Europe had to pass by Vietnam on the way to China, and vice versa. It's a key location in the region. Next, let's look more specifically at some of the features of Vietnam itself, so you'll have your bearings as we go through the course. The nation of Vietnam is anchored on two river systems, the Red River in the north and the Mekong River in the south. For much of its history, the peoples living and thriving around these two deltas have not really been unified as one nation. Rather, they have existed as two or even more separate nations. Also notice the Gulf of Tonkin, which will become particularly significant during the American experience in the Vietnam War. The earliest settlement of the region, and the first signs of a nation now known as Vietnam, arise around the city of Hanoi in the north. Eventually, southern settlement will center around the city of Saigon. For much of its history, the capital of the nation was the historic city of Hue, which is centrally located. Also notice the neighboring nations of Laos and Cambodia. For much of its history, Vietnam has been lumped in with either one or both of those nations to form one nation. This is true during a period when Vietnam was an independent nation known as Dai Nam, including portions of Laos and Cambodia, and also during the period of French occupation, when the entire region was known as French Indochina. Cambodia, for centuries known as the Khmer Empire, has exerted a powerful influence over the region as well. Before getting into the details of the history itself, let me make a final observation about the people. While there is an ethnicity we might describe as Vietnamese, which today does make up a majority of the population, the country over time has consisted of a mosaic of many different peoples, languages, and cultures. We think primarily of the Chinese influence, and in more recent centuries, the French. But other nations have also exerted a strong influence in Vietnam, and their people have migrated back and forth. Thai, Khmer, and a northern group known as the Cham, centered in modern Laos, have been especially influential. What we'll see is that over time, patterns of settlement and how these regions were ruled, by whom and from where, will change many times. When the United States begins to intervene in the period after World War II, we are entering a part of the world that had experienced varying degrees of colonization, imperialism, and independence going back thousands of years. In our next lecture, we'll talk about the earliest history of Vietnam and the powerful influence of China.